Greetings, everyone. I'm Vox Day. This is the Darkstream and voxday.blogspot.com and Infogalactic News. Well, it's a bit late, so I'm going to keep this one relatively short, but I was going to talk about the myth that we increasingly hear about, or we have increasingly heard about on the internet for a while. The false, incoherent, and offensive idea of what they say is judeo-christianity, or judeo-christian values. And the thing is that what most people don't realize is that this is just another American myth, another 20th century American myth that was created and concocted by a combination of Christians and US-based Jews who wanted to create more sympathy for the recent Jewish immigrants. And so what they were trying to do is this was really before the whole Holocaustianity thing. You can look it up on Google Ngram. It's very clear. Virtually no one ever used the term Judeo-Christian in that sense before, if I recall correctly, it was the 1940s. And what Judeo-Christian actually means in its original etymology is a person of Jewish descent who is a Christian. And so there are no shared Judeo-Christian values for the very obvious reason that although Christianity is based on Old Testament Hebrew scriptures, remember, Jews are not Hebrews. I mean, Jews are descended from the Hebrews. They were part of the nation of Israel, but the Jews today are roughly half Italian, and they have a whole different set of holy books which actually post-date Christianity. And so it's a fundamental error to think that Judaism, the religion today, has very much to do with the religion that was practiced prior to Christianity. Okay? I mean, you're not seeing them. There's a whole. I mean, there are aspects that are in common, but of course, there are plenty of aspects that are in common with Islam. And in fact, if you ask Jews, they will tell you that Judaism, as it is practiced today, has considerably more in common with Islam than it does with Christianity. And in fact, many Jews consider Christianity to be intrinsically inimical to Judaism, and so, you will find, if you look on the internet, you'll find rabbi after rabbi criticizing Christian Zionists for using the term Judeo-Christianity because they consider it to be offensive, and anti-Semitic. So far from, most of the people who use the term Judeo-Christian do so in ignorance. They do so basically because they've been propagandized and brainwashed into doing so. It's something that Christian Zionists, and to a lesser extent secular U.S. Jews, have been pushing for some time now. But there's a backlash against it from people who are religious Jews, and of course Christians like myself who understand the history of the term and understand that it doesn't mean what people think it means. A lot of people will tell you, well, there's a lot of the Bible is based on the Old Testament and so forth. Well, that's true. But Islam also teaches reverence for the people of the book. How often do you hear the term Judeo-Islamic? How often do you hear the term Christo-Islamic or Islamo-Christian? Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Well, Judeo-Christian is every bit as nonsensical and incoherent and even offensive as those terms. And so if you hear people using that, then I would strongly recommend that you correct them. Judeo-Christian, used properly, means a Christian of a Jewish ethnicity. And so, and obviously that's something that, as we know from the fact that Israel denies the right of return to Christians of Jewish descent, that it's not something that Jewish people tend to look at very approvingly. And so, so on the one hand, you have a concept that intrinsically involves conversion. And then on the other hand, you have a concept that is intrinsically false. And so in either case, it's totally ridiculous. And you might see occasionally that I will make fun of it on, I'll occasionally make fun of it on Gab and whatnot, or on my blog, when I like to quote some sort of ridiculous Cuckservative statement and attribute it to the sacred sayings of Judeo-Christ. And so it's important to remember that the truth matters. History matters. I'm not technically blocked on Twitter. I'm just not using it of my own choice because they were demanding that I give them a phone number, and I'm not about to do that. So I'm essentially locked out by my own stubbornness. So, yeah, I mean, Twitter's not really that relevant. I mean, it'd be nice simply for these periscopes, because then the announcements would go out. Yeah, you can't just give them any number. They want to send you an SMS and authorize it and all that kind of stuff. So I have no interest in handing out my contact details to the SJWs at Twitter. So anyhow, yeah, if you're not on Gab yet, you should be. I mean, it's interesting because I think I've got nearly 17,000 followers on Gab, and that took like 6 months. It took about 6 years to get 28,000 followers on Twitter. Quite a bunch of whom were in the last 2 years. And so, anyhow, it's just I have no interest in using Twitter. In general, I prefer not to use the services of people who consider me to be, the enemy and so forth. And they're not wrong. You shouldn't still be waiting in the Gab queue. They've been getting people through, so you might want to check your spam and whatnot. I don't know who E. Michael Jones is, so I have no thoughts on him. And but anyhow, to get back to the subject, this is something that a lot of people get upset about. Christian Zionists tend to we've already said this. Judeo-Christian does not describe European culture. European culture has nothing to do with Judaism. There's a reason it was called Christendom. Okay, Judeo-Christian is a new term. It was invented and is used solely in the United States, and it was just basically a way of trying to pretend that Judaism was an influence on the founding fathers and so forth. And so, but if you understand that the Judaism is about considerably more than the Old Testament, you can't just count. It's there's two major holy books or whatever. Yeah, I mean that's the best way to put it. It's a way of retconning Jews into Christian culture. America is not Judeo-Christian culture. America does not have Judeo-Christian values. America is a historically Christian culture based on Christendom, and the values that it has are historically Christian values. And so, the Judaism is about more than the Torah. It's also about the Talmud. The Talmud is post-Christian, has no influence whatsoever on European history, with the exception of the gradual acceptance of usury over time. And so it's ridiculous and ahistorical, and as I have pointed out earlier, it's offensive to both Jews and Christians. Now, a lot of the Christians, few Christians will take offense at that, in the way that they would take offense if you talked about Islamo-Christian. But yes, there are some similarities and some shared history among the three Abrahamic faiths, but they are still fundamentally and intrinsically different. And for the most part, Judaism is every bit as anti-Christian as Islam is. Islam, and you can find rabbi after rabbi talking about how Judaism, it has more in common with Islam, and Jews are more comfortable with Muslims than they are with Christians. So the whole concept is intrinsically absurd, totally ahistorical, and it's a perversion of a term that was already coined to refer to a Christian of Jewish descent. So, anyhow, I just, this doesn't mean that that Jews and Christians can't get along perfectly well. There's nothing that says whether they're secular Jews or whether they're religious Jews. There's no problem there. But it is the point that I'm making is that it's a false and deceptive propagandistic term that you should understand. That you should understand what it is. And, it's the same thing as the melting pot. Read the melting pot play sometime. It will really surprise you. I mean, for all the soaring rhetoric about America that you see quoted from the melting pot, that's just two lines of dialogue from the end of a play that is entirely about the experience of Russian Jewish immigrants in the U.S. The term was created because at the time there was a lot of, for good reason, there was a lot of angst because of what was going on in Europe between the Germans and the Jews, and to a lesser extent the Russians and the Jews and so forth. And so they were trying to come up with a way to make Jewish immigrants more accepted in American culture. And so they coined this term. They really borrowed the term, and ended up using it to try to basically try to make these different immigrants more acceptable to the native population, and it worked. It was generally successful, and but it was weird. I noticed the whole pushing of it too. I remember they used to talk about Christian values all the time, and then suddenly, I don't know, it was maybe 15 years ago, suddenly nobody talked about Christian values anymore. Suddenly kept hearing talk about judeo-Christian values. And we see this sort of thing all the time now. I mean, now we're much more perceptive, and we notice these things, especially because the internet causes these terms to get adopted so much more quickly. And so now we notice it when everyone suddenly starts talking about Trump being crazy, or They, I can't think of any examples at the moment. It's pretty late here, but you see a new term being used, and then suddenly everybody adopts it, and so that's what happened with the whole concept of judeo-Christian values. If you notice, it's always used in that context. It's always used in that context. Nobody actually talks about judeo-Christianity. So it's basically a meme. It's a false one. It's just petty U.S. propaganda, and so yeah, that was a good one too. The whole, but we see it in the U.S. too. You talk about migrants versus refugees. You talk about illegal aliens versus undocumented immigrants. All of this stuff is the manipulation of language that is meant to shape the way the unthinking think about things. And so the more that you can recognize it, the more that you understand the historical truth, the more you can understand what is really happening, and how people are attempting to modify the way that you think. So, anyhow, I just thought it just had come up in a discussion on the blog, so I thought might as well devote a Darkstream to it. So I hope that proves enlightening and illuminating, and otherwise we'll look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good evening, and I'll probably be back on here around Monday. Cheers.